Now, all right. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the BirthFit podcast. I don't know if y'all know that you're attending a live recording of the BirthFit podcast. Um, it's been a while, but we are kicking off with an amazing guest. She's a mom and a trailblazer and wears so many other hats. Minister Veda Revival. And I'll probably just be calling her Veda as I get into the conversation. But she is here to chat with us about what to do if you don't want a birth certificate. As simple as that. And we're going to jump in, and I'm going to let her share a little bit more about her story and how you got started down this path. I know it starts with one of your births, so you want to take it away.
Yeah. How I got started. That story is like it's because I feel like the whole story of life is kind of interwoven, right? You realize how many other things in your life were preparing you for other things, but I'll just kind of keep it pretty basic. I had my first baby. And throughout his pregnancy, I was revealed a lot of different things about the truth about birth and all sorts of things. But when it came to the very end, it came to the birth certificate. It was one of those things where I like had knots in my stomach about it. Like it didn't
Yeah.
feel good to me. It didn't feel right to me. But also I didn't know enough about raising a baby without one. So, they have you on this little like time frame after there's this like 10-day window that's like you got to get your registration done. So it didn't give like certainly did not give me enough time. Plus you're postpartum, you're not even like on earth, you know what I mean? You're still anyway,
Yeah.
so it's just like one of those things where I filled out the information. I never signed it because that like made me feel better about it, but that, I mean, still created a whole birth certificate, the whole
Yeah.
thing. So, yeah, that happened. And then I got pregnant again. And as I'm connecting with my baby, every time they're connecting with me, they're like, I need to be born without a birth certificate. And that was like coming through so clear to me. And luckily that I had spent my whole first birth learning the truth about birth, that I got to spend my whole second pregnancy really deep diving this. And I feel like if any of you guys, I mean, I see in some of your cute pictures, a lot of mothers here, you kind of know that babies speak so clearly when you're pregnant. And like, it's honestly, pregnancy is like the fast track to really anything. Like the downloads come through like you wouldn't believe. So I kind of got a fast track through my pregnancy, but it didn't feel fast, I guess. It felt I don't really know. It felt like a full gestation of learning. But also on top of it, my husband had booked a trip for us before my baby was even born for us all to go to Mexico. And when my baby would have been 4 months, 3.5 months.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, so if I'm going this path, we need to freaking figure this out quick too, because yeah, I need to get that passport without a birth certificate.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of how the journey went for me, was just like doing it because I searched high and low for resources and they were nowhere. So I was like, okay, I guess this is where guide me to the things. And so I was guided to the things and so here I am. It's
And
a long
so
story short.
that's your first and then your second baby.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Okay. And now let's just paint a picture now of what you do for moms because you really support moms and families. And yeah, elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this journey, I guess going back to even like how I ended my last comment, this journey can feel lonely because it feels weird at first. There are not a lot of people out there talking about it. So even for me, when I was looking for resources, I was like obsessively looking for resources and I could not they just didn't exist. So that's really one of the reasons I was like I have to create the platform to be that support, even someone else saying, hey, I've done it, to like make people
Yeah.
feel like I've done it. Because what I was hearing before, there's a lot of people out there that I had found at the time when I was looking, there was a lot of people talking about it. There was a lot of people talking about the problem, but not offering a solution really.
Right. Right.
So that's the struggle that I was finding. It's like we're finding like the truth about the birth certificate and a lot of learning about reclaiming the birth certificate, but it was like knowing what I knew, I didn't want to do that in the first place. You know
Right.
what I mean? That didn't feel good. So I was like, hey, really kind of as I understood the path and how the system works, it was really revealed to me that there's the system that works and there's a way that we can do it completely privately, mirroring the system essentially.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
can still operate in society, because obviously that was going to be so important for me,
Yeah.
is I didn't want to take any opportunities away. I didn't want to be like, well, I don't want to get you a birth certificate, I'm making this choice for you. Really, it was, first of all, felt like my baby making this choice and me just kind of being led down the path.
Hmm.
But really, it was so important that this path wasn't leading him to roadblocks or opportunities missed in life. I wanted all
Right.
the opportunities to be
Yeah.
there. So, really, that's essentially what I help mothers and fathers do, is learn how to replace the birth certificate and raise babies successfully in society, in life, in the world as we know it, without one as well. Because as far as I knew before I even started this whole journey, that everything you need a birth certificate and a social
Right.
security number for. So luckily early on, I mean, there are many things earlier in my life, and I think probably a lot of us here can relate, that you get to a point in your life where you start being able to see something that you've had this firm belief your entire life, and suddenly be able to think like, wait, is this true?
Yeah.
You know? And it's
And
something so
then you see it
basic,
all the
which
time.
but the birth certificate is so interesting because it's one of those things that we don't really like. There's so many things within birth, that it's like we can think, oh my gosh, this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true. And then there's so many women not knowing, that are fighting so hard and learning all these things to have these like out of the system births,
Yeah.
unknowingly handing their baby right over to the system the
Right.
moment baby's born, not knowing what that contract is.
Yeah.
So it's just something that kind of slides by. And again, I feel like it's this uh intentional window they give us so that you don't have time to think about it. And then you do it and you move on with your life, and you don't think back
Never
about
think
it
of,
either.
yeah. Yeah. Never think about it again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you putting okay, let me back up and ask a question for the audience here. So what's so, I don't want to say bad, but what's the deal with the birth certificate? Like the hidden meaning for some that may not have ever questioned it before.
Yeah. So basically, what I started learning and realizing is just this awareness of contracts, and that literally everything is a contract. So when you are signing these legal documents, what are we signing, and what legalese there is, and how they use certain things to trick us. So
Yeah.
what kind of started my rabbit hole, I want to say, was learning legal terms. And those legal terms taught me why they would use certain language specifically throughout the birth certificate. So kind of not deep diving all of that too deep, really essentially the birth certificate is a contract that creates a business in our name. Really, that's what it is. So we can operate
Yeah.
in commerce. It essentially is the title, and we are handing the title over to the government as the owner. So it makes the baby ward of the state essentially. So you start realizing how the system works, and then it starts making sense where like any essentially three-letter agency can come take your baby if they don't like how you're mothering or fathering your baby, because technically and legally they are the owners of your baby.
Right.
Okay. So it just started making sense to me that, well, and then again, you learn how the system works, how the United States corporation actually works,
Right.
and
Yeah.
started comprehending essentially that what backs the national debt is us and our future labor. So that's what our babies, like the moment we're registering them, that's really what's backing the national debt. We are the human collateral for that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah,
So there you go.
yeah,
There's the secret. When I think, you like you said, there's so much underneath the surface. There's more to, long story short. But like you said, all the language and stuff originated somewhere. And so it originated, as probably you and I have learned, if I'm not correct, like from the Roman Empire or the Pope. and all of that. And we won't get into all of that here, but you just keep digging, you'll find layers and you'll peel away layers, and you'll be for me, when I started digging, and it was very similar to your experience, like I was presented with the birth certificate postpartum. It didn't feel right. I was like, something in me, but your cloudy brain postpartum, you're like, wait, I
Mhm.
didn't research this. I researched the freaking group strep B. I researched, the Pitocin, the placenta, all of it. But what? Like now I got a gut feeling and this doesn't feel right. And I don't have time to do this because you're right. Like they put a time limit on you. But when I started digging down the rabbit hole, it's like, okay, like you said, they create basically a trust fund in our name. And that's we're making a deal with Washington, DC, the corporation, not the United States of America, the nation. And that's when I was like, whoa, light bulb, boom, 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 boom. And
Yeah, all the
it's
dots start connecting at some
yeah,
point where you're like, "Oh my gosh."
yeah. And at first I was like super pissed. I was like, oh my God, my liver is gonna explode. I got anger all in it right now. Like, what the heck? Um,
Mhm.
but then I was like, okay, no, like you said, like, okay, this happened for a reason. It's part of my journey. And now, like, I'm so glad I was able to connect with you and the ladies of, the Cosmic School, and share this with other women, share this with other families, and y'all have it all figured out. But yeah, I'm glad we talked about the origin of the birth certificate, and knowing that you can, like, as moms or future moms, you can start to make decisions like, okay, now I know this birth certificate with all capital letters, that's my name as a business. Um, just random question. How much do you think, and somebody else asked this, like, how much do you think is in each of our trusts? Um, Millions
That's
of
a great
dollars?
question. Honestly, I have not like because there's gonna be a few different people that wanna, like, access this trust. I
Right,
have not really that's not been my intention or
right.
reason for doing any of it. So I don't
Yeah,
know. There's zero backing to this. But that essentially everyone born is at about $1 million. And that grows over time though, because you actually can
yeah.
look up the QSIP number for your birth certificate. And that birth certificate is a security and it is traded and sold on the stock market. So you actually
Mhm.
can look up and see what your actual birth certificate is being traded on and sold for by
Dang.
major companies.
Yeah.
So that's just out there. You can look up your own. But that's,
Look
I
up
mean, it's
your
again,
worth.
it's based on this concept or this idea. And that's why the moment they want you registered is because they get funding for
Yeah,
every single one of those. I mean, it goes a little bit deeper when you start thinking about what money even is and how
right.
it's all credits, right? It's credits, but essentially you create credits that they get to access. So the
Mhm.
state, which, state of California or whatever is, a sub corporation of United States Corporation, and each of those corporations are getting funding with everyone that's getting
Right.
born and registered. So, yeah, we're all, because how much is this little baby that's being born going to be paying in taxes in the future?
Right.
So the moment that baby's
Oh,
born, they're like, get them in public school, get them in all the things so we can
yeah.
like raise them to be a worker. Get
Hmm.
them paying in society, get them paying their
Yeah.
taxes because that baby's a dollar sign.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, okay. See, it'll piss you off first, and then you'll do
Which,
something about it.
yes. And honestly, that's a normal, I feel like there is a whole mourning process that goes through
Yes.
like it goes into all of it. And you kind of have to feel all the feelings. Um, and there is an anger, and that's I feel like it's part of it. You got to feel
Yeah.
it and then let
Yeah.
it move and know that we're here right now for a purpose. I
Right.
think to see the truth, and we're
Mhm.
we're the change makers. The next
Right.
generation that's coming through right now is coming to usher in a whole new era of freedom. And
Yeah.
how lucky that we get to be the mothers that get to bring these
Yeah.
babies in and facilitate that and foster
That's
that. I
right.
think it's like so exciting when you kind of see the purpose and the alchemy in it really too.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they have to have somebody like us, somebody in that transition space in order for it to happen. Love it.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have to feel all the feelings to move it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you can't skip
Yeah.
that part.
Oh, yeah. You have to feel the feels.
Like all the things, even like the taxes, like all of it when you're like, oh my gosh, and I've been like, you know, living paycheck to paycheck at certain points of my life
Yeah.
and could barely, and you're giving all of it to the government and you realize all these things that you're like, it was
Yeah.
voluntary,
Yeah.
you know,
Involuntary. Yeah.
all the
Okay.
things.
So let's go with how does somebody, like, let's say I just had a home birth, because I think the hospital route or a birth center route is a little bit different and trickier, right? Like,
Hmm.
um, okay, so
Yeah.
let's say I had a home birth, or maybe you can start with what's the best route if somebody was like, okay, I know I don't want to get a birth certificate, register my baby.
Love that question. So the only way to guarantee a sovereign baby is to have a sovereign birth. And when I say sovereign birth, I mean that you are not inviting the state to your birth. So
Mhm.
this gets a little bit tricky for some
Yeah.
people because some people are thinking like, okay, I have a home birth or I had a birth in a birth center or something. And you didn't realize that the woman that you invited to attend your birth, maybe you had a home birth, but you invited your birth team to your home. And that midwife was licensed by the state. So
Mhm.
she's an agent of the state. So the
Mhm.
moment you invited an agent of the state, now you've had a birth of the state. So I
Mhm.
think it's kind of obvious when you go to the hospital because a hospital is you have OBs, they're all licensed, they are it is a it's the facility of the state, okay? So you're entering the state, but I think a lot of women get tricked thinking I'm having a private birth in my home, not realizing you're inviting them right into your home.
Right. You open the door to somebody licensed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So
That's,
that
yeah.
and I want to kind of bring up this concept right now too, just to kind of as a plug, because I know it's a question that a lot of people have is, well, isn't it illegal not to register your birth?
Oh,
And we're all
yeah.
like worried about doing this thing that sounds so like illegal too. So it's illegal. It's okay. I'm gonna back up here. It is not illegal not to register your baby. Okay. If you are a woman or a man as a mother or father, okay? It is not illegal.
Mm,
It is illegal, however, for a licensed provider to attend a birth and to not register that birth,
that makes sense.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're the state. They have to do that to keep their license. So
Right.
there's a lot of, people that come to me and they're stuck to this licensed midwife and they're trying to like find a way to not register this birth. And I'm going to tell you, there are some midwives out there that are willing to risk their license for you.
Hmm.
There's not many. Okay.
Right.
And you're asking them to do a lot, honestly, because in their mind, they're seeing that's the way they've put food on the table. You know what I mean? But that's a lens as well, because a lot of those licensed midwives don't realize that they didn't have to make an oath to the state. Their allegiance is to the state, and it will be. That's kind of the gray area they start playing in is I think a lot of midwives go this path because they want to serve women. Um,
And their heart's good,
mhm.
they
Yep.
mean well.
But the moment you start going against things that go against their license, which I think a lot of mothers will notice if you've had an experience with sometimes a licensed midwife and say you go past 42 weeks or whatever, and suddenly they can't see you anymore because their loyalty is not to you, it's to the state, it's to their license. They're going to lose their license over it.
Right.
On the contrary, not a lot of people know that you can be a midwife and be unlicensed. You don't have to make an oath to the state, have any allegiance to the state, and you can actually just serve women. And then also, we're groomed in our minds to think that an unlicensed means that they're not as qualified,
Right.
which that's a whole other thing, which if you're asking me, would argue that an unlicensed midwife in many ways is more qualified because they do see women past 42 weeks and they do see twins and
Right.
they do see
Yeah.
breech births and all these licensed midwives that aren't allowed to. Maybe they would like to, but their license doesn't allow them to. They aren't attending those births. They're transferring
Right.
those births because they have
Yeah.
to.
They usually
So,
see the within normal limits birth.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
That makes sense.
yes. So, just knowing who you're inviting to your birth is really, really going to be important. It's hard to keep the state out of your birth when you're inviting the state to your birth. So that's why I say, like, the only way to guarantee a sovereign birth or a sovereign baby is to have a sovereign birth.
Yeah.
But again, there are going to be some things that slip, but I would not say that's the rule. It's definitely not the rule. And you're asking a lot of someone to do that for you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So if somebody's planning on a hospital birth or a birth center birth, because I kind of put those in the same category, honestly.
mm, yep.
Would they in order to get out, they probably have to have a birth certificate or sign it. Like, do you know of any stories or anything where
Oh, yes, I've got lots.
I'm sure
There's so many, so
I'll make it
many.
out.
You name it. Like, I actually can't even tell you how many moms I get that are like in the hospital bed and they're like, what do I do about the birth certificate? And I'm like, listen, just be with your baby. Well, okay. So I want to back up before I even get into what I want to
Okay.
say
Yeah.
is that if you intended to have a home birth or a free birth, sovereign birth, whatever, and you end up transferring to the hospital, everything's going to be okay. Okay?
Mm,
It's
okay.
everything's going to be okay, and don't let this part of it psych you out if you really were set on not getting a birth certificate. Everything's going to be okay. Focus on bonding,
That's
connecting with your
good.
baby, and
Yeah.
just like making this a beautiful experience the best you can instead of this fearful off
Yeah.
the shelves. Know that most likely that baby's going to be registered, and you can do all the thing. Like the main thing is don't give them your baby's name. You know, you're still thinking on the name. Don't because they want a name to put on that
Yeah.
trust. You know, however. So a lot of people think too that they'll go to the hospital and they'll give notice essentially saying, "Hey, you know, there's lots of birth plans out there that essentially will say, I don't want a birth certificate. You know, hospital policy isn't law, blah blah blah." You can say all those different things, but what happens is you are waiving those rights when you're entering that
Yeah.
space, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
like people don't realize when you have a lawyer represent you, you're waiving your rights and someone else is making decisions on your behalf. So essentially that's what happens when we're doing that same thing. We're waiving our rights no matter what we're saying about our rights. We've given those away. So they don't need you to sign the birth certificate to create a registration. Oh, and I also want to make very clear too, the certificate of live birth, that's the registration that then creates the birth certificate.
Mm,
So a lot of people are thinking like, "Oh, I just signed the certificate of live birth," not realizing that that was what created the birth certificate.
right.
They don't need you to sign it at all. So a lot of people are leaving the hospital thinking like, "Awesome, I didn't sign anything, like I didn't get a birth
Yeah.
certificate," only to find out that baby actually was registered because legally, if they attended your birth, they can be the ones to submit registration.
Well, okay.
So that's kind of their way around things. Of course,
Right.
they want you and they legally are required to ask you for your consent, but they don't need your consent. They were there, they attended it, they know what happened, so they can submit
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
I know.
So it's basically you have to accept that if it's a transfer or you're birthing in the system, it's you're part of the system, your baby will be registered.
Yeah. And
Makes
it's
sense.
just a different path. And you know what?
Totally.
That path is like it's not the end of the world. You know, it's just a
Right.
different like I will say any baby that has a mother that's here is really lucky because they have a mother that just knows enough or is on the path of learning and wanting to truly teach their little one how to operate in the world that we live in, and
Right.
they're going to be able to navigate and have the tools to navigate the system without being played by the system, right? Where
Right.
you learn to play the game rather than be played by the game.
Yes. Yeah. And I feel like that's what we're doing, I'm doing and we're doing with
Mhm.
Vera and the future. Like they get to kind of straddle the best of both worlds. They get to have a choice, maybe. I'm trying to
Mhm.
come at it from a positive lens and that because like we were just talking about, like at first I was like so pissed because I saw it as like this either or this black and white. I was like, oh my
Mhm.
God, of course I would never give up my baby, blah, like this, like F them, you know? But
Hmm.
then you start to think about it and you're like, okay, yes, I'm a mother that's absolutely needed to usher in this change, to raise this change maker. And now she gets to have the best of both worlds. Or
Yeah.
at least
And
learn.
yes. Yeah. And honestly, it's like either way you go, you can create the best of both worlds, right? Because even if you
Yeah,
have a baby without a birth certificate, you're creating the vehicles for them to operate just like one that would have a birth certificate, only you're the true controller rather than the government. But also, I think it's about knowing who you are truly.
yeah.
And any one of us could have a birth certificate. Literally, all that means is we all have a trust in our name. Okay. And that trust is owned by the government. Not a lot of people know that in God we trust is actually a trust. And most of us intentionally were taught what a trust even is or how to operate out of a trust. And which is like the funniest thing because we've all been operating out of a trust our entire lives and we didn't know it. We've all
Yeah,
been operating as the representative of this business trust. So, yeah, really, it's like it's not a scare. A lot of people go down this path thinking like this is like a scary thing or the birth certificate's scary. It's really not something to be afraid of when you know who you are and you know what it is.
yeah,
And you know that there is nothing that has more authority over you. You just have to know how to navigate, and that really everything's about jurisdiction. And they're always trying to trick you into their jurisdiction by you thinking you're something you're not.
yeah,
I guess I'll say. And it really is this, I don't want to keep just like blabbing on about this, but it is kind of learning this system on being Mr. Anderson or being the representative of that business sometimes and being Neo,
yeah,
and
yeah.
knowing how to operate. And even as with a sovereign baby, you're still creating vehicles, like I said, that allow them to do both things
Right.
just intentionally, but
Hmm.
not being, yeah, anyway.
I love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
the Matrix was so right. Like
Yes.
so much truth to the Matrix. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so how do you like I'll start with Rachel's question over there. So she says, we unknowingly consent to a lot with the birth certificate and social security card, social security number. But if we opt out of those and get a passport, are we consenting to something else? And is the passport the way to go? Like,
Mm.
yeah, let's go
Yes.
there.
I love that question because a lot of people, yes, a lot of people ask that too. So it's a very great question because the passport application is a legal, it's a legal document as well.
Yeah,
So there is a very specific way that you fill out the passport in a way that, because a lot of people don't realize that there's a difference between citizenship and nationality and the way to get a passport. Okay, so citizenship is going to be a way that they're tricking you within their jurisdiction and they're trying to get you essentially just to be a part of it. But when you're claiming, so citizenship is going to be part of becoming an employee on their ship. Like, whose ship are you on? You think about citizenship and even the words to put you into the jurisdiction of water, maritime
mhm,
water. You're on their ship,
yeah,
versus nationality, which is putting you on the land and soil. So you're very intentional and very specific on getting the passport based on your nationality. You're filling it out a very specific way so you're not putting yourself into their jurisdiction through citizenship. Um, yeah, and actually, what's really interesting is you look at your state ID, like your driver's license or whatever, and it has first, middle, last name in all caps, okay? And your driver's license. But on a passport, and I want you to know too, living men and women do not have first, middle, last names. They have given names and they have a family name. So the way that they put you to intentionally, again, it all goes into like legalese and how the law works. But on your passport, it actually says given name and surname. So that's
mm,
another really important part of it is that you are still operating within commerce, but not in commerce, if that kind of makes
yeah.
sense. You're still operating as, yeah,
You're like a player, but
yes.
not a pawn. Oh my God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, one of the really important, okay, I'll step back a little bit too. Sometimes I'm sorry, I get ahead of myself and I'm like, oh, I want
No,
to
I do
jump
it
all the
all the
way. I'm
time.
like, let me explain where it from the beginning. But the passport is such an important part of it is because that really is the gateway to so many things. And that's the one that really proves your nationality.
Mm,
So you can create all your private records, which you must do to
yeah,
get the passport. But you can show all these people your private records, which are legal and they are lawful. But not a lot of people in the Matrix are going to like understand what that means. So, but the moment you show them a passport, they're like, oh, okay. Because they know they've
yeah,
gone through thorough checks, they're
yeah,
legally and lawfully allowed to be here, and then that's all they need. Most people don't even realize why they're asking for certain information.
right. Like they're
But
just
yeah,
doing it because they've been instructed to by their boss.
yes, yes. And they don't realize they're asking just because they want to know that you lawfully are allowed to be here. And
Yeah,
the moment you show them the passport, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, that works. But you get into the birth certificate social thing, and people are like, well, wait a second, you need that when you're
yeah.
like, but anyway, yeah,
So
yeah.
so that's the first thing you would get for a new baby is a passport.
Yes. So a
Okay.
passport's going to set them up. Well, obviously, so you're creating your private records, okay? And sometimes I'll say, so private records will replace a birth certificate completely. And I hate saying that the birth certificate or these private records replace the birth certificate because
Yeah.
that's not actually true. The birth certificate replaced the private
Private
records.
records. Well, okay, let's go off on this tangent for a minute because yeah, when I started going, when my wheels started turning and going down this rabbit hole in my head, I was like, what did they do before birth certificates? Like were how did they keep track of who was in their family? And it was like they had family Bibles. And
Yep.
like
Yep.
that's where they would keep track of stuff. So yeah, you're exactly right. The birth certificates replaced the family Bibles, the family records, and oh my God. So
Yep. And I mean, you can do all this family history going off what people passed down throughout their family Bibles. And
yeah,
birth certificates weren't even like a real, I mean, they started more back like in a religious sense back,
yeah,
they started being required in the 1800s back in Europe. But in the United States, not every state had a birth certificate like requirement until the 20s. So, you start
wow,
realizing how new
yeah,
actually this is.
yeah. Not even 100 years old, like maybe
Yeah.
100 years old right now.
Yeah. And
That's
what
just
most people also don't know is that these private records, these family Bibles and things, they actually hold more weight than a birth certificate does. They've stood the test of time.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Okay, so if somebody's creating their own records, do you have a template for that or like what to do?
absolutely. Yeah. So I have all the templates.
Okay.
I'll have all the templates for all the things because when you're also doing these private records, verbiage, like we said, language is like extremely
Everything.
important as well because you don't want to be using language or things like that, that you're
Yeah.
taking your private records and putting yourself right into
Yeah.
jurisdiction, which is so crazy. And it's just kind of frustrating, honestly, how tricky they are. It's just the further you go down this path, it's so blatant. Like you
Yeah.
can't deny that they knew exactly what they were doing and the way they're using the language and
Right.
how they copyright certain names, like parent and certain things.
Yeah.
So when you're identifying a certain way, now suddenly you're within jurisdiction, how they yeah, so you're just very particular with your language and all the templates, but I've made it like very, very easy for
Cool.
every mother and father that exactly how to do it. Because even the family Bible itself can be like, I remember like family Bible, I'm like, what does that even mean? So
Yeah.
I've created all like the templates, how to go about that, how to create the affidavits with all the verbiage, all the language, and everything and for every scenario you can imagine.
Yeah.
Because really, for most people, the birth certificate is their everything.
Yeah.
Which is actually, I mean, I want to say is interesting. The birth certificate, all that shows is that you are a corporation that
Yeah.
exists.
But
So
it's what
there's,
we've been led to believe is like keep up with your birth certificate, keep up with your social security card. Well, basically it's like here's my documents to prove I can work.
yes, right? And what's actually even more interesting is you look back on social security cards that were created back in the 20s and it literally says employee signature on there. Like it
Yeah.
was like you're an employee to the corporation. You are. So,
Oh, goodness.
anyway, it's just kind of interesting how, of course, over time people start catching on to certain things. So
Yeah,
they're constantly kind of changing certain things to keep it under the radar on how the system really works.
yeah,
And of course, the public school system is created specifically to keep us all in line
yeah.
in formation. You
Information.
know, when you start in formation,
Ugh.
the word magic they use on everything is just like, oh my gosh. So yeah,
Yeah,
the words are everything. The words we use are
words matter.
everything.
Yeah. Okay, so you would create your own family Bible, you would get your
Mhm.
passport, and then
Yes.
that's how this little one would operate or navigate in the world using that passport.
Yes. So a passport will allow him. So at that point, I'm going to start at the very ground.
Great.
Once you've set them up with their private records, and it's not just a family Bible, like there's more, especially if you want to operate in this realm of
Yeah.
proving aliveness essentially is like
Yeah.
what's like silly that you have to prove aliveness beyond just you being. It's got to be on paper and it's got to be also be able to operate in the legal world and the lawful,
Hmm.
the different jurisdictions. But essentially, yeah, you have your private records, you get the passport, and the passport is what will allow them at that point, if at any point they're like, you know what? I really want a birth certificate. Mom and
Mm,
dad, this is not the life I want.
right.
Even if you're a mother or father and you're actually like, this actually, well, I actually don't want this, at any point, you can use those records and everything you have and go get the birth certificate. And there are some,
Right. So there's the choice there.
yes, which I think personally is the ultimate choice
Yeah.
that we're giving our little ones to even
Yeah.
choose the birth certificate, where if we just automatically get one, we're taking that choice away from them as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's one thing that I
Love it.
really loved is that you set that foundation. That is like the ground foundation. Beyond those two things, because the passport will allow them to go to school, play sports. There's some certain things that are
Travel.
like, we want all those things. What else? You actually can get a birth certificate, or you can get a social security number without the birth certificate using your private records as well, if that's a path that some people want. Everyone kind of has to assess their own life situation and decide if that's something they want to do or not. Just know that that actually is an option if you do want a social security number. Personally,
I mean, I have one, but what's the benefit? Is there
so
a
that's
plus?
essentially what's like the straw man account that
Yeah.
yeah, so they can get bank accounts, they can do certain things with their social. But to me, I'm like, there's all sorts of other, like, you don't need it when you're operating out of a trust. So
Right.
I'm going to say that beyond the passport and allowing them to go to college, go driver's license, all those different things, operating out of a trust is going to be really, really important because all of us, like I said, we've already been operating out of a trust. So
Right.
instead, we're operating out of a private trust intentionally. That's where we're banking. That's where we're doing all those different things and operating that way. And
Yeah.
most people don't even know, like, if you, whatever your free baby's name is, they're operating out of a trust instead of their government trust. Because if you
Right.
start thinking, like, okay, you have a government trust in your name and your social security number is attached to it. All that is that's your EIN number sub
For that
corporation,
account.
right? So everything you've ever bought, everything you've ever used with your social, ultimately the government owns.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the reason why things have to go through the court system when a family member dies or whatever, because essentially they are the owners of the estate.
The holders of the estate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you think you own things, and if it's in your some people call it the straw man. If it's in your
Yeah.
social name, the state owns it because they own that
Right.
business. So really what you're doing with your baby is you're creating a trust intentionally, a private trust that's not within the corporation's jurisdiction. You're operating that way with your EIN like you would a social,
Yeah.
all in that capacity. So,
Okay. So yeah, that's how you would operate. Like if you wanted to stay just let's say parallel to the system, side by
yes,
side.
exactly.
Um, you would create your family trust. Um, you would fund that with, as we've talked about, like life insurance. Um, And that's how you would pull from your own private bank account, correct?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep. Exactly. So the trust essentially is the owner and you are
yeah,
the operator of the trust.
got it. I
Yeah.
hope y'all got that. Write that down.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust
That
is its
makes
own
sense
like
'cause-
whole thing in itself on how to like understand. Like I said, it's like silly. We've all been living out of a trust, not
yeah,
even knowing it. But when you start really learning about trust and how to like intentionally operate out of it, it just all the whole world makes sense.
right. And y'all don't feel bad if this is like mind blowing right now because I literally just learned this at 42 years old. 41, 42. Like how old am I? um, and it's fascinating, but also, like I said, there's anger and mourning and all that stuff. But now it's like, okay, I'm just gonna play the game till I'm dead. Like, let's figure this out. Um,
Yeah.
and I want to die free. That's kind of my motto right now. Um, okay, so if you operate outside the system, gotta have a trust. That's how you would pull. You would just basically do what they're doing, but in your own little mini version over here.
Exactly.
Love
Yep.
it. Okay,
Exactly.
and then I think you and maybe the cosmic school ladies have a package that has
Y-
everything. Can you?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
tell me
So
about that, and
essentially,
then I got some more questions.
yeah. Yeah, I'll talk about that because there's like a few different
Yeah,
things that if you really want to set your baby up for this life, I don't even know what to
yeah.
say, this path, you must
This
be very
alternative path.
intentionally.
Yeah,
Yeah, you must be very intentional. And of course, there's the records, there's the passport. Beyond that, that's the trust. And then beyond that is getting a life insurance policy for your baby to be able to do their private banking.
and
Not
you
that's
would get
like
that in your baby's name,
and well owned by the trust.
owned by the
But yes, the
trust. Okay,
policy on your baby.
right.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. Really everyone should be operating
needs
this way.
one.
We say free
Okay.
babies, but really when you start seeing how the system works and you want to start separating yourself from that social, we all start operating this way as
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
actually. But yes, the life insurance policy is essential. And most of us have been taught what life insurance is that it's for the death benefit. Someone
right.
dies, they pay into it their whole life, and then when they die, the family gets this benefit. Yes, that's true, but they also have taught you that limited knowledge because they don't want you to know how life insurance really works. And
Yeah,
that the social security fund, all it is an insurance trust fund. And every single one of us are all insured. Every bank uses insurance. Like everything is about insurance, and how you can actually use insurance to function in the system. So what you're doing is essentially you're getting an insurance policy for your baby and they can private bank and you actually can too. You create your own private family bank this way through utilizing an insurance policy that your trust owns.
yes.
So yeah, anyway, I've done webinars on that. It's a whole thing in itself. So really
Yeah,
what I
they're
want to
great
say is
webinars.
there's
They're
a few
great
different
webinars.
parts that are really important to this life. And the last thing I want to plug and mention is also the family coat of arms and
Mhm.
how that crest in itself creates private jurisdiction for your family. So just this whole concept, I want to, paint a picture for most people is that like no one would sail a ship on the ocean without their flag, or otherwise another jurisdiction can overtake them. You
Mm.
have to claim your jurisdiction or your jurisdiction will be assumed.
It's so
So,
crazy that it's all like water language, maritime language, but when you think about it, like kind of everything's free game in the ocean.
yeah. And that's why the whole law of the water was created was because of this trade, commerce. Everything was traded through boats and ships
Yeah,
and
yeah.
whatever, right? So it's like everything's going to be a water word when you're dealing with commerce and maritime law and not on the land. So when it comes to having the coat of arms, which is really interesting, is because the right to bear arms actually referred to the family coat of arms.
Uh,
So people don't realize what protection spiritually that even is for your family in creating
yeah.
your private jurisdiction. Because what'll happen is the state, they will assume jurisdiction. And until you can either prove jurisdiction yourself or challenge their jurisdiction, they will assume. And if you don't stand up, if you don't know your rights and you're not
Right.
coming in aware, they'll do whatever they want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so this seems like a good time to interject of there's a great question when Caitlin had over here, and then I think I just told her, just do what I'm doing. Like if your baby, we registered our baby, you know, it was a big man, we goofed, we biffed. What's the next steps to take? And that would be like, go to your website, help me.
Yeah.
How
So
do we get
essentially,
out?
love that question. So essentially, what you're still doing is you're still creating their own private records, okay?
Yeah.
Because if you only have a birth certificate, the
You
only
don't want
proof
that
you
to be the
have is
only
that they're
thing,
a dead
right?
entity. Yes. So you do want to create your private records that tie you back to the land. Okay. And then you're still doing the same thing. You're
Yeah.
creating a private trust. You're operating out of that trust and that EIN rather than the social. You're operating out of the life insurance policy. And essentially, like your baby, you can't claim your own estate. Essentially, how it's kind of interesting how things work is essentially you your baby the reason the state can claim our estate is because all we have is the birth certificate that shows that we're actually lost in debt at sea. No one's here to
Right.
claim it, so the state is here to claim it.
Right.
So when we're basically your baby we can't say, hey, I'm alive and I want to claim my estate until we're of what's called age of majority, which is 18. So your baby can't go claim their own estate until they're 18. But essentially what you're doing is you're holding them and their private records within your private trust
Mm,
until they're able to do that. So
that
you are
makes sense.
still claiming them within your own private jurisdiction in the
Mm,
meantime
yeah.
until again, and you're teaching them this whole lifetime of how to play the game so they're not ever tricked out
Yeah.
of knowing who they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Love it. Um, I can't think. Yeah, she was like taxes, life insurance, all the good stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I would say if you're listening or you're here right now and you're like, I want to know my options, I want to go down this rabbit hole, definitely go to Veda's website, what's your website?
VedaRevival.com. Yeah.
Easy, easy.
Easy. Yeah. And I'm most active on Instagram. So if anyone's on Instagram, let's connect on Instagram. It's Veda.revival. But that's kind of where I post all my stuff.
Yeah.
TikTok wants to delete me, so I'm really not active on TikTok.
Yeah, if you're inside the Blueprint membership, you've seen her first video in there. So there's a link in there. Um, Following immediately. She
Love it. Love
said.
it.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, let me know if you have any more questions in here. We're starting to wrap up. I know one person submitted a question on let's say they go this route of, becoming a, what do you like, there's a difference between citizen and nationalist, but like they opted out of citizenship, we've become a nationalist. Their question was, can they still vote? And I know I already asked you this, and I know the answer to this, but
Great question.
can you explain?
Yeah, sure. So the United States Corporation, right? There's the United States and there's the United States of America land and soil. Okay. So when you're choosing to, go by your nationality, you're choosing to go by a living being living on the land. The United States, again, is a corporation. So all the president is he's the president of the corporation, and only employees vote for the president of the corporation. So if you're not an employee of that corporation, then you don't vote.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, and it makes so much sense now why, like, the president of the United States needs to be good at business. Needs to be a
Or
good
are
business.
they? Yeah. I mean,
Or
yes,
are
right
they?
now we have a businessman, but I wouldn't say that all of our presidents have
Not
been
all the past
businessmen.
ones have been, no.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So really it's and they don't own the corporation. The president doesn't own the
Right,
corporation. They're just the president of the corporation. They don't Yeah, who actually
yeah,
runs the corporation, who actually owns it,
right.
that's another thing.
Okay, I had one question about marriage
Mm.
license and giving the state rights to your child. Can, Can you talk about a marriage license?
Yes. So essentially a marriage license, so anytime you register anything, okay? Whether it be your baby, your marriage, your car, anything you're registering, really the root word of Regis means king or queen. So you're handing the title over to the crown, which is
Mm,
really more of
yeah,
the who owns the corporation, okay?
yeah.
Ultimately. But through a marriage license, all you're doing is what you thought you were doing. I'll say what we think we're doing is we think that we're creating this sacred contract between us and our spouse. When we
Right.
register that and get a license, what we're doing is we're creating a contract between us, our spouse, and the state. So this is the reason. Now we're in a three-way contract, and
Well,
actually the state
polygamy.
has is the ruler of our contract. And so this is the reason why if you get into any disputes or whatever, say you get divorced, you have to go through the courts, and the courts are the ones that get to
Oh,
decide how you divvy everything up is because you invited them as a party in your contract.
right.
So what I would say is when you start learning about trust and you realize how important trust is, and in every aspect of your life you're operating out of a trust somehow.
Mm,
So operating out of a trust instead of even a legal marriage is honestly the best thing, because really what you're doing is you're actually creating a contract between you and your spouse, and your baby is the beneficiary, and everything you
mm,
do within this contract must be for the benefit of the beneficiary.
that's cool.
So, yeah, I call it sacred trust because
Yeah,
that's really the ultimate way to operate a marriage is through sacred trust rather than
yeah.
through a license by the state, because that's just their way to trick you to get into their contract. And if you want to get married privately, people don't realize you can literally just do that through your family Bible. Simple as that. We don't have to ask for permission or someone else to like claim it to be
Yeah.
legit. And we're
Official.
so used to asking, like, well, how is it legit if someone doesn't,
Yeah.
Big Brother doesn't say it is? It is. It is through your family Bible, through your affidavits, and all those different things. So we don't need the
We've been,
state
yeah,
into our
we've been
marriage. And
so
I want to, no,
so
go ahead.
conditioned. I was gonna say we've been so conditioned to just ask for permission and allowance for everything.
Yeah. And
Oh,
we've been tricked in so many ways too to like opt into benefits
yeah,
of the corporation, you know what I mean? Because they're like, well, if you get married, get us in
yeah.
your contract and you get a tax
You're gonna
write-off,
get a tax
or
benefit. Yeah,
register your baby, write them off on your taxes, and not realizing that those are things you didn't owe in the first place.
right,
But
right,
it's a way to like get you tricked into thinking you're gaining benefits, and that's how you're accepting their offer. You're accepting their contract by getting their
right,
benefits.
right. Oh, makes you think about the benefit. What there wasn't there one that just passed with like every new baby gets $1,000 or something like
Yes, yeah, yeah.
interesting.
And people, yeah, it's all by design. That here's $1,000. This is what we make by you registering your baby, you know. Everything
Wow.
is at a cost. So I will just say that because a lot of people will ask too, like, what about um, state insurance or
Yeah.
whatever. I will address that because so you cannot get government insurance without a social security number.
Mm,
You have to contract with the state in order to gain that benefit. So you'll have to kind of decide, everyone has to decide what season they are in their life, if that's
yeah.
something. But people think that state government assistance is free. It is not free. You have to think, what are you contracting? Everything comes at a cost. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
So you have to decide what cost. And again, going back to the core of who you are too.
Right.
Um,
It's a
you're
big,
not the birth certificate, you're not the
yeah.
social, but like ultimately too, kind of sometimes we're playing a dance with the devil, and you kind of have to decide if that's the dance you want to play.
Hmm.
Sometimes you have to play that dance, depending on where you are in your life. So I don't want to like put any shame on that either, but at least you're doing it knowing instead of
Awareness. Yeah.
unaware.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Well, and I think you nailed it. It's like you have to know yourself, your values, your priorities in this season, whatever season you're in, and then make decisions from there. Um,
Hmm.
because like you said, yeah, one path may not be for you, another path may be for you. Um, but yeah, I loved have loved getting to know you and all your information, and watching your path and your light just shine, because you've helped bring awareness to my world, and hopefully this conversation can bring a lot more awareness to women as the nourishers, the energy pulses of their family.
Yes. Oh my
um,
gosh, yes.
is there anything we didn't touch on? um, I
Hmm.
I totally wanted to do like big picture, like super fast. I know there's a lot, and we crammed it into about an hour. Um, but y'all use Veda as a resource. She's great. Go to her website. She's got packages, lots of packages set up. And this is her mission. Her life's work is to help women and families navigate outside the system. And super grateful for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Like, I
Yeah.
appreciate that so much, more than you know. There's nothing that brings me more joy than connecting with other well, families, I'll say, but especially mothers that are just, there's something so special and gives me so much excitement and hope for the world that we're creating right now. And it's
Yeah,
just
totally.
growing and growing. And I'm like astounded at how many, I don't know, because like I said, the road can feel lonely. And
Yeah.
sometimes your neighbors can all think you're crazy or whatever, and that's okay. But seeing actually how big this really is,
Yeah.
it's so much bigger than we think, and it's growing. And so it's so
Yes.
great to connect with
Yes.
all these other people that maybe this isn't even necessarily their path, which is okay. But having open hearts and open minds to other ways, I think
Yeah.
that's the most important thing. Is there's not just one way.
There's not one way to live.
Yes, yes.
Amen. All right. Tell me your website again and your Instagram for those listening.
Yes. So yeah, VedaRevival.com and Instagram Veda.revival. And yeah, I'd love to hear from all you guys. I'd love to
Yeah.
connect with everyone. So
Awesome. Thanks so much.
you're so welcome.
Yeah.